It's match day in the Premier League. Arsenal travel to West Ham United looking for back-to-back Premier League victories for the first time since the start of October. With December now nearing, of course, we've got the transfer window to look ahead to. But Mikel Arteta's press conference has taken over the headlines. We're going to discuss that and more in today's Arsenal News Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk. Back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal News Show. Joining you every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Thank you as always for joining me and making this a part of your morning routines. Good morning to those, joining us in the chat box. Matt G, Barry, Black Shine, Maximia, Sarah Silky, Martin, Paul, Rob, Knowledge, Mubarak, Damien, Stevie, Zoom, Mike, Tabani, Paul, Natty, Barry T, Cam. We've got Stephen and Angela and Gooner, 76, David. We've got John. Who else have we got? Jean, Assad, Loga, Olawale, Glenn. Good morning to you all. Thank you as always for joining in. Jean says, how exactly, in terms of numbers, are we away from the Emirates Stadium capacity? It's a good question. We've only got a month to go, and of course, it was our target at the beginning of the year that we set ourselves. Emirates Stadium capacity is exactly, I think, 6,704. Yes, it is. We are on 60,536. So doing some quick maths there, we've currently 64 away from 600, so 168 subs from our Emirates Stadium target. Of course, we will be starting our Arsenal transfer show in a day or two. 30 days has September, June, November. So tomorrow, 1st of December tomorrow, and we will indeed be embarking upon the Arsenal transfer show going into the brand new the final month before the January transfer window opens. So we've got a good chance, I think, of welcoming some new people to the channel. But we're 168 subscribers away from filling the Emirates. So if you are indeed new, you're listening for the first time, maybe you're listening on audio platforms and you aren't subscribed on YouTube, hop over. Even if you're not going to watch us here and you're still going to listen on audio platforms, help us out, join the crew, and help us on our way to that target. A quick apology, there was no preview show yesterday. I had a lot of things crop up that was unexpected. So apologies for that. I'm going to run through my team, though, for you shortly after covering today's stories, which we kick off, as expected, with Mikel Arteta's press conference, which does indeed dominate basically all of what our part one of the show is going to be today. He was asked about the response of his team after the international break, of course, winning 2 and hopefully getting a 3rd in a row today. He says, I don't link character to winning. This team showed unbelievable character against Inter and we lost. Showed unbelievable character against Chelsea. We were the better team and we didn't manage to win. The same players, same intentions, being more efficient and winning matches. That's the difference. And of course, this weekend we see Liverpool take on Manchester City at the Etihad. He was asked if they would need to be near perfect if they want to catch Liverpool. And he said, well, if they continue that way, that's for sure. The numbers they're producing, the number of games they're winning. But again, it's just the focus in on us and maintaining the consistency, especially in performances, that's going to give us the right to win a lot of games, keep the availability in the squad and keep everybody together. And this is a long run. And of course, that game at the weekend, asked if he'll be watching it, he said 100%. It's a big match, a beautiful match to watch. 2 of the best teams in Europe facing each other and competition for us. It is a big one. Now, Pep Guardiola, of course, did have a little bit of an issue, it's probably fair to say, when he did his post-match press conference and interviews where he had just witnessed his Man City side drop a 3-goal lead to finals. Well, Arteta was asked about his good friend Guardiola and whether he reaches out to his mates, of course, when he goes through these periods. He says, that's something very personal, but I feel a lot of sympathy for all of my colleagues because I know the job, how ruthless this industry is and how we get judged just by one thing, results. Regardless, if you do exactly the same thing and the outcome becomes different, we have to deal with that. I know how difficult it is because personally I've been through that a lot and every defeat obviously is super painful and that's it. just put some perspective into it like we always do and move on, because there's always another game. It's always interesting when you hear him talk about kind of Pep Guardiola and his relationship with him and kind of that clear friendship that's there and that's been tested, I think, with the mind games of press conferences. I have a small secret feeling that, what's said in press conferences about each other or around one another, there's obviously some discourse that goes on behind the scenes, I think, between the pair. I'm just speculating, that probably means that, no matter what they say in the press, it's for the press, and what goes on behind closed doors will stay behind closed doors. And of course, there is some question marks about team news, which Arteta, of course, wanted to address as well. He was asked about the squad, but the main kind of point of contention was indeed Gabriel Magalhaes and whether he will be available for the team. On the team news as a whole, he says not a lot in terms of information because we have another training session. You've come to expect these types of answers from Arteta at these points. He continues by saying we have to see how the boys are today. A few weren't able to train yesterday, but hopefully today. So we will have to wait and see. So, saying a few weren't able to train on Thursday. Of course, they travelled back Tuesday night, getting back on Wednesday, probably had recovery. They would have done a little bit more recovery on Thursday and a training session where some may or may not have been able to take part. Then, of course, after the early morning press conference, there is indeed another training session. It is interesting, of course, that these Friday press conferences, I think it's one of those things that's worth looking out for now, is the timing of these press conferences. If indeed Arsenal are playing on Saturday, which of course they are today, is the press conference on a Friday early in the morning? If the game is on a Sunday or a Monday, is the Friday press conference later on in the day? Because of course, doing those press conferences, if you play on Saturday, you do them early in the morning, it allows there to be another training session, so Arteta can point to that as a reason why he doesn't give the team news. And if indeed they're playing on the Sunday, there can be a session on the Saturday of which he can point to if it's a later press conference in the afternoon on a Friday. So just one I think we need to keep our eyes on. We know that there are always little strategies and tactics at the club, and Arteta in particular wants to use to try and keep things under wraps as much as possible. That's one I think that maybe they are indeed trying. But Gabriel, of course, as well, is also talked about, and in particular is spoken about. And he just said, wait and see. I can't give you an update, not because I don't want to. And that update, of course, is that we don't know. And I think that he's in the end going to be okay. He was asked the question about Thomas Partey's contract. He says, we will have the right time to discuss this situation. So not really an answer. It's probably fair to say. And that's because he's not going to turn around and say, yes, we're going to offer him a new deal, or no, we're not going to offer him a new deal. He has not given us an answer. He says, we will have the right time to discuss this situation. Now, that could be whether or not he signs. That's not an indication of whether they're going to sign. That's not an indication of whether they're even going to hold talks over a new deal. That is just a blanket answer of we will have the right time to discuss this situation. He continues by saying he's showing consistency at the highest level again because his availability and the way he feels being physically is allowing him to do that, and I'm pleased with that. So that's the end of part one. We're going to go to part two, and we'll kick off part two with my lineup right after this. So, a mini preview, if you like, ahead of today's game against West Ham United. My 11 is unchanged from the team that beat Sporting 5-1 on Tuesday night. Raya in goal, Timber, Saliba, Gabriel, Calafiori at the back. Gabriel, of course, coming into the team, hoping that he's going to be fit. Partey and Rice in the midfield, of course, with Ødegaard playing attacking midfield, Saka, Havertz, and Martinelli making up the front three. That is it right there. Why would you change what isn't broken? But I think this also raises up something of a question. Arsenal have a very big game in midweek. It's just a few days until Arsenal will face Manchester United and Ruben Amorim at the Emirates on Wednesday evening. Now, some might say that we need, therefore, to talk about the kind of the rotational needs of the team, and the rotational needs of kind of this situation where players do need to be given minutes and players do need to be protected when there's so many games coming thick and fast. That said, I do think that there are question marks surrounding why Arsenal's international break saw so many players, of course, not play, allowing for some rest and recovery, which I think means at this moment in time, I'm not too concerned about the need for rotation. So I'm playing this team. West Ham are a tough team to go to. I know we battered them last season away from home, but you can't guarantee that's always going to happen week in, week out. And I think here we need to go with our strongest possible team available. Let's get some predictions, of course, from you guys in the chat box in terms of scorelines that you're going for, and then we'll tackle some of your questions to round off today's show as well. From a personal perspective, I think we've got to aim for another big scoreline. Probably a 4-1 I'm looking at West Ham. You know, they are dangerous. They can score goals, but I'm hoping that our overwhelming quality and pressure and presence is going to be enough to give us a result. Kai Havertz with, of course, the TGT prediction of a hat-trick. One day it will happen and it will be glorious. Maybe it will be today. And the other goal can come from, let's say, Martin Odegaard. It would be nice to see him get on the score sheet after his return from injury. Jason going for a 2-0 win. Alvamod's going for a 2-1. Rowan's going for a 3-1. Temi says 4-0 West Ham. I'm interested to see what you think about this scoreline, because I think there is going to be maybe a broad view of different predictions. Angela says 3-1. Mohammed's pointing out that there's no Kudus in today's game. You're right, he is suspended, filling out his last suspension. Zoom says 4-0. Matt G says 3-0. The Dapper Mo says, is Kudus back? No, he's not. He is suspended. Grantley Poo says 3-0 to the Arsenal. Granda de Gooner Paul says 5-0. Erdegaard with 2 of them. Mohammed says 4-0 Arsenal. The Walking Man says 3-0 to the Arsenal. And Knowledge says 3-0 as well. So lots of positivity in the chat box. Rob going for an 8-1 victory there. But yes, it seems that a lot of you are indeed feeling very good about the situation. Right, let's jump to questions then, which is, of course, where we go into part 2 as well. We'll start with some of these. Michael Drack in the chat says, new member joining us and part of this TGT family. Thank you, Mike, for the kind comments. I think I've neglected the link for the new Discord server for a little bit. So after today's show, I'll make sure I try and drop that into a community tab for our new expert members and TGT ambassadors as well, so you can join the Discord if you haven't done so already. That is, of course, only available to those that are TGT expert members or ambassadors in the Discord. Let's just scroll up because I feel like I missed a call. Jackson says, good day, mate. Keep chugging. Love your work. Thanks, Jackson. Very kind of you indeed. Barry says, what do you think about Pep's facial scars and the scratches? I mean, football's a stressful sport. I think there's many of us that have punched a sofa or kind of had our head in our hands at times. And, when you don't have the blessing of hair, if you ever are trying to pull your theoretical hair out, it can leave marks. So I'm not surprised. I don't think his post-match comments were too sensible, in terms of how he discussed them. Obviously, he did address that after the game. I don't think he meant anything by it. It just was ill-advised to say what he said. But I'm not surprised that he was very frustrated by his Man City team dropping a 3-0 lead to that point. Arisuka says, don't forget we're playing after Champions League away matches. Fatigue might be an issue as well. And that's why, of course, there is going to be question marks about whether or not we do change the team for this one. Do we bring in players like Jorginho? Do you bring in Zinchenko? Do you give players like Havertz a rest and play Jesus? Do you bring Sterling in? Do you play Trossard from the start? There are questions. That is all that needs to be pointed out. Let's scroll up in the chat. We talked about the Partey situation, and Josh in the chat box replied saying, Tom, where we find the comment? Where was it? Let's go with, where is it gone? Has it been deleted? Has Josh deleted his comments? Oh, dear, Josh. That's a shame. Here he is. I found it. Well, Tom. What did I say about Thomas Partey a couple of days ago? I mean, Josh, you pointed out that, that Arsenal would indeed renew his contract. Nothing that Arteta has said there suggests that is going to happen. Arteta's given a very media-friendly answer to the question marks about Thomas Partey's contract situation. His exact words were, we will have the right time to discuss this situation. He's not going to give us an answer about whether or not they're going to renew him to a new deal or not. But we will find out. There are question marks about whether Arsenal should renew Thomas Partey's contract. The big question, of course, footballistically, is that there are serious injury concerns that continue to crop up out of the blue and spontaneously that really cost Partey significant portions of his seasons at Arsenal. Can we rely upon that? Should Arsenal still be going into the market and adding a midfielder? I absolutely think that we should. If Arsenal can add a really quality midfielder in the coming months, be that in January, be that in the summer, Adam Wharton being linked with the club at the moment, certainly would be a very, very smart move by the club to make. Aaron says, Tom, I'm just getting into the video late. My dearest apologies. No problem at all, Aaron. But why is the video only on 100 likes, Aaron? You've got these freeloaders. What can I do about it? If you haven't dropped a like, people, already, please make sure that you do. Maximus says, Tom, did you watch the Kate Abdo versus Micah Richards video where she bans Richards from speaking about Stade Brest, of course, the French side? Yes, I did. Very amusing indeed. And some just like light-hearted jokes, not hurting absolutely no one. So yeah, very, very funny indeed. Zoom says, is Mikel finally realizing he has the squad to embrace the concept of starters and finishers? I think he's always looked into this as kind of his practice. Trossard, of course, I think is seen more so as something of a finisher, but can start games if very necessary. You've got other players, of course, coming off the bench like Kivior, like Zinchenko, was seemingly a finishing games more recently as well. Gabriel, Jesus, Sterling, other players, of course, also Jorginho coming in to help the midfield and calm things down as well. So, yeah, I think there are certainly this concept is something that he wanted to address, but Arsenal need to have competition. Arsenal need to have competitors in the team that are able to start and come off the bench as well. Grant says, do you think there will be a major surgery to the squad again in the summer? Zinchenko, Jesus. I think there may be more signings than maybe we anticipated because of what happened in the summer and the previous January. We haven't done as much business as maybe was predicted because of restrictions financially. With that being a net zero summer, maybe Arsenal's financial freedom that should open up next summer will see that serious overhaul happen once again with players like Jesus, like Zinchenko, moving on again. Gooner76 says, if I would offer Uncle Thomas a 1-year deal if he stays, would you if he stays fit? I mean, if he stays fit, that's always going to be the question, isn't it? It's always going to be a question mark. If Partey can stay fit, then the footballer is somebody, of course, that you would want to keep at Arsenal because, of course, he's done, he's been our best midfielder this season and he's earned that position in the squad. But it is that question mark that continues to kind of linger over the situation. And I do think that Arsenal need to look into still bringing in, and revitalising that group of midfielders, regardless of what happens. Man City fan 1234 says that they would go for Baleba of Brighton over Adam Wharton, who has also had a very good season. I mean, it's worth pointing out that he's kind of risen up this year. His stock is really only from this season. He was okay last season, but his stock has really risen this year. So there's always going to be some caution, I think, surrounding that, which is, absolutely fair enough. You want to be cautious. He kind of last season was a transitional season to Brighton. This season, he's finally started to establish himself and looks much, much better. TJR says, would you take Evan Ferguson on a dry loan in January? Personally, I mean, yeah, I would take him on a loan. It's never going to happen, though. We talked about this yesterday. There's absolutely no sense in Brighton loaning Evan Ferguson to Arsenal. It's not going to improve his situation. It's not going to improve things. Nick says, Tom, you keep saying that there's a net zero summer, so it doesn't make sense why you don't think Arsenal can/will spend in January. Nick, because the reason is that the PSR cycles run from July. So Arsenal's summer, of course, which was effectively net zero, it's still going into this January. Arsenal's approach in the summer, because of the market not being too forthcoming with options, and the January window is even less so forthcoming with obvious options, is still going to run. So if their approach has been a sustainable one with the view to 2025 and that summer window being a very key summer for Arsenal's transfers, it does make sense because the restrictions will still linger into that January transfer window. It won't be until July onwards in the summer of next year that those restrictions free up much more. So that's why it does make sense to consider January. I've said also, Nick, it should be pointed out, I've said there are no excuses when it comes to Arsenal not adding an attacking player in January, because there is some financial freedom in January for Arsenal to make a deal, just not as much as it would be, in my view, from what I understand of the situation, to do the Declan Rice type deals that people keep talking about this winter. The Declan Rice type deals that we've seen in the past, I only foresee happening in the summer, and that's because of the cycles of PSR. Mark says, let's be realistic. If Partey goes, which player plays 6 as good as Partey? Even Rice can't. I mean, absolutely Rice can. Rice's best position is as a number 6. And last season, the first half of the campaign, when Partey sadly wasn't available to us, Rice was picking up man of the match performances and man of the match awards like they were going out of fashion. It was Declan Rice who managed to get into the PFA Player of the Year awards, as of course his half-year performances as a number 6 that were better than his second half-year performances as the number 8 when Partey returned to the team. So without question, Rice's best position is a 6, and he can play that 6 role and will be and should be Arsenal's number 6 for the foreseeable future in the years to come after Partey eventually does, of course, move on. So yeah, without question, Rice is going to be that number 6, I think, in the future. I don't foresee him being the number 8. He plays that role very well, and he's transitioned into that position in a really good way for the most part. But his best position, as we all know, and as we have seen from his time at Arsenal and from the awards that he's picked up, playing that number 6 role in the start of last season is without a doubt his best role in the team, and certainly it shouldn't be overlooked. Obelix says, who would be your preferred signing of a left-sided player in January? I've talked about this before. Ademola Lookman stands out for me as the player that I would go for as an attacking option for Arsenal. He adds versatility, he adds goals, he adds assists. All of that is something that Arsenal need this winter, and I think that Ademola Lookman would be an astute piece of business for a player of experience, but a player who's not too old, far from it, and a player that's producing consistent goal contributions at a very good level in the Champions League and, of course, in Serie A with Atalanta. CNS says, I hope Jorginho will stay with the club after his playing career ends. His intelligence and experience is unique. Of course, he's doing a lot of coaching badges right now. He's preparing for his post-playing days. Will that be with Arsenal? We will have to wait and see. I'd be very surprised if Jorginho's contract was extended from a playing perspective at Arsenal into next season, and it may be that he decides to return to Italy or goes, elsewhere and earns, an end of career kind of wage in one of the higher paying nations of the sport. But we will wait and see. But I would be surprised if indeed he was that player. Vanaduty says, thoughts on last night's VAR decision? It took, again, a simple case of it taking far, far, far too long to come to the decision, which didn't need to. I think it was really obvious, I think, to the naked eye that Archer was offside in that movement. But why it took so long to get to that point of the goal, again, it's maddening. And fans inside the stadium are the ones that are suffering the most. They have absolutely no idea what's going on from the perspective of someone who sits in the ground with a television in front of them, who's able to see what's going on in the VAR. We know what's going on, and often in the Emirates when there's a big VAR call, like we saw, of course, in the Arsenal game previously, when Mikel Moreno was deemed offside rightfully against Nottingham Forest for his goal. We know that everyone was turning around and looking at us and waiting for an answer, and we didn't have the answer because we didn't have it ourselves, and we couldn't see the lines at that point. It was very, very tight that call was made, but it's taken far too long for these decisions to come to a conclusion. So the one thing that Partey has over Rice is the line-breaking passes, and this is why Arteta seems to favour Partey and Jorginho at the base. Rice is certainly better in defensive senses. It's also worth pointing out that in terms of a left 8, Arsenal don't have too many options besides Mikel Merino. And with Mikel Merino coming into the team, it will be intriguing to see if Merino eventually starts to establish himself, whether Partey drops or whether Rice drops. That is going to be very interesting indeed. And for big games, if Merino starts, who is the player that is going to be dropped? Is it going to be Partey or is it going to be Rice? And I think that will be very, very telling as well. Per says, do you think that a Jesus exit in January is good business, or are we just going to wait until the summer when his form bounces back? I don't think it's good business if Arsenal can't add 2 forwards in January, which I just don't see happening. I think Arsenal should hold on to Jesus until the summer and then bring in another centre forward, as we know needs to happen. But also bringing in a wide forward this January while keeping Jesus is also going to be very, very important indeed. Obelix says, when is the next, or rather the new offside technology coming in, the one that's been used in the Champions League? It keeps getting pushed back. It keeps getting delayed. There's no official date at the moment, but it was meant to be coming in after this international break. But at the moment, that's not happened. Paul says, did you realise that Archer wasn't even given offside? They called offside on the player in the middle who the ball went behind. He didn't touch the ball when the goal should have been given. I mean, Archer looked offside to me in that moment. I know that the player, of course, who kind of put his leg back into fit. I mean, he does go for the ball, the player, with his trailing leg. You can see he makes an action towards the ball. And if he is in an offside position, and indeed the goal is rightfully ruled out. But Archer was already in an offside position when the ball was played across. Callan says, many people saying how 25 will be a big summer for us, and with the quiet summer we had building up to that, does the same apply to City and Liverpool? Are they expecting a big summer? I imagine so, because both of them didn't really spend any money in the summer of 2024. Manchester City signed Savinho, of course, but they sold Julian Alvarez for a significant amount of money and actually made a profit during the window. Liverpool, meanwhile, wanted to spend on Martin Zubimendi, but that deal couldn't happen. They only ended up signing Chiesa, on a small deal. They will both be able to spend plenty of money in the summer 2025 window, and it is expected to be a window that you would see more business by both of those clubs. On a Slot having established himself, players like Salah, Van Dijk, Alisson, Trent maybe as well, all have their futures in a bit of flux. So that is going to generate, I think, a lot of movement. We've got players like De Bruyne, like Bernardo Silva, Gundogan, of course, aging as well. Man City are going to have to do business. Grealish is falling out of favour. They're also going to be looking to do significant business, I think, as well. So it's going to be a hectic one in 2025. It always has been, as I've said on the channel before, predicted to be a very big summer as well. Wise SF says, Tom, it's not that hard to keep Partey regardless of potential injury. He is an option, and Jorginho leaving already, we would need to buy another midfielder. As I've said before, I've said this category. I've never come out here and said I wouldn't give Partey a new contract. I've not said that. At one point, I've said I'm just not overly committing to the idea of signing Partey to a new deal. I'm not going to sit here and say, without question, he should sign a new deal, because I can't guarantee that these next 6 months, there isn't going to be a situation that occurs that sees him missing for a considerable period again. And then the whole context of the conversation changes once again. We've had this before where Partey has been missing, and the conversation around Partey has been, yeah, look, we have to move Partey on. We should have accepted the bid from Saudi Arabia, so on and so forth. It absolutely continues to be a area of it's a situation that remains in flux. It's a situation that remains open. I'm not going to say either which way at the moment where I would go with the contract. I'm not on either side. I'm sitting firmly with splinters in my backside on the fence on this situation right now, and that's fine. Now, this idea that everybody has to sit on one side of the fence, that you have to nail yourself to a post on a point of view, is mad. It's absolutely mad. So from that perspective, no, I'm sorry, but I'm just not gonna force myself into the social media world of having to have an opinion. There are 3 very underrated words that don't get used enough these days. Those 3 words being, I don't know. You don't have to have an opinion on everything. Paul says, Tom, the VAR line showed Archer was onside. The VAR felt the guy in the middle was interfering despite the defender nearest. Okay, well, if they felt the guy in the middle was indeed interfering, they're right. He was, because he does make a play towards the ball. Nick says, if I was speaking to a Liverpool fan and felt like Arsenal have a reputation for bottling it, I tried to explain that we shouldn't even have been up there, as we were indeed ahead of schedule. I think that the Liverpool Arsenal dynamic is just so different that it can't even really be compared, because when Arne Slot comes into Liverpool, we've talked about this before, when Arne Slot came in to the position of Liverpool head coach, he overtook and inherited one of the best 3 teams in the league. When Arteta inherited Arsenal, he took over a team that some people didn't even rank as a top 6 side in terms of its squad and quality in the lead. That is without question the biggest problem and the biggest issue that I have. By the way, people spam in the chat. I'm not going to read your questions. I'm not going to read your comments out, especially if you turn around to me and start saying, why aren't you reading my comments? Everybody leaves comments and I read them as best I can. So it just doesn't happen that way. I think I actually read one of the comments out before as well. So it's never a good way. And when you spam the chat, you end up getting put in timeout. It's just the way it goes. Alvamont says, Man City, calm down. Tom doesn't get to all the questions. It's the same for all of us. Thank you, mate. I try my best. I can only get to so many questions. And I tend to, when someone starts spamming the chat, it does tend to put me off then clicking on them. Damien says, only 3 outfield players have played more minutes for us this season than Partey. The PTSD over his injuries is real, though. It's definitely real. Like, you can't help but not. I mean, if you ever look at Thomas Partey's injury record for Arsenal, it is absolutely horrendous, the games that he has missed for us. It doesn't even, if you go on the transfer marks page of his injuries, it doesn't actually show the full history. He joins Arsenal in the summer of 2020. He misses 6 games from November to December. He misses 11 games from December to January. He misses 4 games from February to February. He misses 4 games between July and August, which I assume must have been pre-season matches. He misses 1 game in February of 2022. He misses 14 matches for club and country between April and July. He misses 4 matches between August and September, still in 2022. He has a knock, which means he misses games for Ghana in September 2022 again. He misses 9 games for club and country between September and October 2023. That was the start of last season. And he misses 25 games for club and country between November 2023 and February 2024. Since then, he has indeed been available to us. Since February of this year, he has been available in a run that has seen him play more games for the first time in a significant period. So this idea that we wouldn't have some questions about whether or not renewing his contract is the right decision, I just don't have a strong enough opinion to say either which way. We are gonna go to Freddie says, "Are you going to the game today, pal?" I am indeed. I'll be there at the London Stadium, looking from millions of miles away to the pitch, hoping my glasses can give me enough as well. Damien says, only 3 outfield players have played more. Oh, we've done that one as well. So this is the thing. RRDM says, Partey is in a good spot. Not signing contract favours him. He will make more money for himself as a free agent, potentially as well. Soup says, I always find it strange that injury-prone players are suddenly fit and ever-present during the last year of their contract. Deary me. TJ says, have you seen Alex Bainer, Tom? He's a player I'd be looking to go for. He's a player that I've written about. I wrote a piece a few weeks ago talking about the 3 players in January Arsenal could look to. Ademola Lookman was one, Alex Bainer was another, and Ryan Cherky was the third. So, yes, I have. He's doing very good things in Spain and for the national team as well. Gavin says, can we have a come on you Gooners from you? Well, you just got it. You just got it by me answering that question, Gavin. So, yeah, indeed, come on, you Gooners. Laughing Man says, don't leave before Waneri scores. Hey, that happened one time, and it had to happen. And I technically wasn't really working. So I was, but I wasn't. I was annual leave. Saya says, to me, ever since the alleged accusations, well, we can't talk about that because of privacy laws, and we won't be speaking about that. Hashtag Danny says, Tom, how can you not do a celebration in the show for famous United win over greatest Bodo Glimt? I mean, I just can't, Danny. I'm not going to. I'm not going to do that because why would I ever celebrate Manchester United getting a result over anyone? YSF, or maybe over Spurs. That's the only time. YSF says exactly our DM, and that's why Arsenal need to act. He is our best midfielder, and it's not even about him being reliable all season. Last year, we don't. Can you be a team's best midfielder if your availability sees your time at the club effectively halved? I'm not sure. When you've got a player like Declan Rice, who is, for me, as good as Partey for different reasons, he's a different type of midfielder and offers different qualities and has different drawbacks, the same as, as Partey also has different benefits and drawbacks. But when you've got a situation, where one player is available 99% of the time, and another player that's available around 60% of the time, surely that comes into factoring who is better than the other. Because you can be the best player in the world, but if you're only available 60% of the time, it doesn't matter. Now, Partey for sure isn't the best player in the world, but he's a comparable option as Partey and Rice being the 2 best midfield options that we have. Partey's availability compared to Rice's means that he definitely falls below Rice in terms of overall who the better player is. Cass says, I agree with you, Tom, regarding the team Arteta inherited, but fans who point out this had 5 years to sort out the team where they should be winning trophies. If Slot wins his first season, Arteta has failed. I mean, I would die on this hill. If Liverpool win the league this season, it's a brilliant achievement. A lot has fallen into place for that to happen. It's in Man City have their worst run ever under Pep Guardiola. It's in Arteta and Arsenal suffer horrendous injuries, incomparable to any of the previous seasons at the club, to key players in key moments in big games. Arsenal, of course, held and should have beaten Liverpool at the Emirates as well if it weren't for them having to finish the game with a back four of Partey, White, Kivior, and Miles Lewis-Skelly. Like the reality is, if it's not about Arteta, it's nothing to do with Arteta if Liverpool win the league this season. It's all to do with Liverpool. It's all to do with everything falling in place for that to happen this season. It's just very, very different. Carl says, Tom, may I recommend a safe pub for respectful Arsenal fans, a 30-minute walk or 10-minute walk from the tube? I like people suggesting things like this always. My reservation with stuff like this is, Carl, is if you bring up a pub that you feel is a safe space. There are, unfortunately, I can vouch for 99% of you guys listening being brilliant people. But there is always that 1% that ruin things. So I'm always cautious, Carl, of people giving recommendations for like pubs that they think are like these secret safe spaces. And trust me, I know a couple of really good pubs in London that I go to that are quieter at times than the big hectic ones. And I am reserved in sometimes sharing that information as well, because sadly, there is that 1%. It's probably bigger than 1% these days. It's growing significantly, so it seems, by the day, especially on social media. So feel free to, Carl, share it in the chat box, but I probably won't read it out. Soup says, this is why I want Man City to win on Sunday. Liverpool's momentum needs to be broken. I would take a draw personally. I've said this before. I think that's the way forwards. Nick says, replying to Cass's comment for a second, Arteta had to rebuild the club, and not just with the squad players, but mentally as well. Slot has not had to rebuild anything. And this is true. Slot has just had to inherit this brilliant team, and as a really good coach already, take it forward. And you know that the most ironic thing about the Arne Slot thing is, if Arteta was sacked at the end of last season, can you imagine? And I'm talking specifically about the people that have really, and you know who they are, the people that have been vehemently calling for Mikel Arteta to be sacked, right? Can you imagine if Arsenal had appointed Arne Slot as Arteta's replacement? Can you imagine what the reaction would have been? Would Slot have been anywhere near the vast majority of any of those people that have been calling for Arteta's head for a very, very, very long time, way before, even during our best seasons, and have continued to do so? Can you imagine if Slot had been the key suggestion? A coach that's never managed outside the Netherlands, that had managed at the highest level only with Feyenoord, that he himself was, you would look at and say, at 46 years of age, only a few years older than Arteta, has only been managing in the scene since 2016, from Camber to RZ to Feyenoord, only has 3 years of experience over Arteta, having won the Eredivisie in 2023 with Feyenoord, and nothing else. Can you imagine what the reaction would have been? So look out for that. If Liverpool go on to win the league, it is a brilliant, brilliant achievement. And Arne Slot should be wildly praised for his work with that. But at the same time, it doesn't take away, it doesn't look bad on Arsenal. It doesn't look, because the things that have happened to us and that have happened to them and have happened to Man City are just night and day. The contexts around those teams and the seasons that those three teams have had so far are just entirely different. So from that perspective, it is just entirely different. But yeah, the whole idea that if Liverpool win the league, it means Arteta's failed. No, it doesn't work like that. That's not how football works. If you want to look at it from a really binary sense or on the surface, sure. But that's not the way that football works. Cass says, Tom, I don't want Arteta sacked. I've heard other channels saying if Slot wins in his first season, then Arteta should go. Not for me. And that's fair enough, Cass. And thank you for clarifying that. But I'm just talking about kind of in the broader context, because this idea that Liverpool's potential league win has any bearing on Arteta's situation at Arsenal is absolute madness. Like, it doesn't make any viable sense, especially when you consider the hypocrisy and the irony of which manager has then taken Liverpool to a title. It's not been an Ancelotti. It's not been an Inzaghi. It's not been a Zidane. It's not been a Simeone. It's been a manager with very little experience, relatively still, compared to his contemporaries like Pep Guardiola and like his predecessor in Jurgen Klopp. And he's inherited that team and taken it forwards. So if that's the case, then surely those people that are battering Arsenal for so far potentially missing out on a title to a Liverpool team who've got a new manager for the first year should therefore also be looking at other young coaches, again, in the mould of Arteta, in the mould of Slot, to take over Arsenal should indeed Arteta ever move on from the club. And that's the irony that breaks and crumbles those arguments and those claims that Arteta is in some way culpable or fallible should Liverpool go on to win the league. Soup says, some opinions are like traps. You've dug yourself in so deep that you can't get out, and so you keep digging, hopefully hoping that eventually you'll be proven right. CNS says, context is very important. We were 1-2 big moments away from winning the league, and now 1-2 signings away from having one of the strongest squads in all competitions. And Arteta brought us here. It's also worth pointing out that Arsenal were seconds away from winning at Manchester City this season. They absolutely deserve to beat Liverpool. They deserve to beat Chelsea. They've had really fine margins in games. They've had really controversial sendings off that have happened to no other team, and that will never happen, in my view, to another team. I cannot ever see another player in the Premier League getting sent off in the way that Rice did, or the way that Trossard did, or even in the way that we've seen Saliba did, because we know that that's not the case. We know that Tosin Rabiot was not sent off at Liverpool. We know that Van der Ven was not sent off at Crystal Palace. It has been one rule for us and another rule for everybody else, and that's just what we've had to deal with this season. So I'm sorry, but it's just playing in different leagues right now. Josh says, Tom, I never said once that we shouldn't get a younger alternative for Jorginho. It's just, I don't think I ever said that you did, Josh. It's just Partey needs to be kept. Do you recall Van Persie's injury record, and now he's turned and how he turned out? I mean, you can't imprint one player on another player, and that's how it's going to work out. We don't know. All we can go off is what we do know about the player that we're talking about. And what we do know is that Partey can suffer spontaneous and significant injuries that keep him out of play for a considerable period. And it has happened on numerous occasions. Troy says, I just visited the Emirates Stadium for the first time, and I'm feeling so happy. It is a lifelong dream for me, and I have accomplished it after 2 years of living in England. Well, congratulations, Troy. I'm so glad that you managed to enjoy that experience, and I hope that it will be something that you cherish forever, and one day that hopefully you'll also be able to get to a game and watch the Gunners as well. Gavin says, you could argue that we're still missing that killer instinct, and that has not changed in years. I mean, Arsenal were pretty killer on Tuesday night in Sporting, were they not? We had killer instinct. I think what we're lacking, Gavin, is not the presence of a killer instinct. We're lacking the presence of a killer instinct on a consistent basis. That's what we're missing. We're missing those performances that we've seen Arsenal produce under Arteta, like at Sporting, or like at home against Man City, or like at home against Liverpool last season, or like in the Chelsea home game last season. We're lacking that killer instinct in consistent games and in other big moments. That's what we are ultimately missing. But it's a level of consistency that's never before been seen in the Premier League for the last 5 years. Liverpool and Man City, prior to Arsenal's rise up the table, and obviously after in the case of Man City, have been able to produce consistency levels that have never been seen, that weren't seen during the Arsene Wenger era, that weren't seen during the Sir Alex Ferguson era, that weren't seen in the Jose Mourinho era, besides, of course, that brilliant home record and the number of goals that they conceded being so low under Mourinho during that season. But even the points tally in that way still did not reflect the same type of points tallies that we've seen in the level of consistency that we continue to see from those two teams, particularly Man City of 6 of the last 7 years. That level of consistency that we're asking for, that killer instinct, it needs to be at a level that eclipses the Invincibles, that eclipses the best Arsenal sides that we've ever seen, because that's the level that's required. And ultimately, Arsenal managed to do last season, where they managed to win more games in the Premier League than the Invincibles and still not win the league. And that's what we're dealing with. And that's why I find it maddening that people are, if Arteta doesn't win a league this season, he's got to go. Because the idea that we would sack a manager that's managed to raise Arsenal to the level of a team that can win more games in a Premier League season than the Invincibles, and is continuing to get closer and closer and closer to a league title, and that you people are just willing typically, and I will be very frank with this, it does tend, I think, to be people that have not watched Arsenal for the same length of time. There are obviously instances where there are others, but I do think that there is something about witnessing Arsenal over the last 5 years and thinking this is the norm. It's not. Arsenal have been in the doldrums well over a decade prior to Arteta taking over, and being back at this level of competing for a title and coming so close to winning a league is not something that should be taken for granted ever at Arsenal. It's not preordained. It's not entitled. It's not something that you can say that Arsenal should categorically be doing, because that's not what sport's about. Sport is a game where anybody can get a result and anybody can win it. And that creates a level of unknown that you can't account for. If you regress and if you go backwards, and if what the decisions that you're taking take you as a club in a direction where it's no longer beneficial to you, then yes, you can absolutely have a conversation about where Arsenal are going and where Arteta is going without question. But this idea that people can take for granted where Arsenal have risen to in the last 3 to 4 years, I just can't get on board with. I've never enjoyed supporting Arsenal as much as I have personally in my own lifetime, as much as I have in these last 3 years. Because when the Invincibles were doing their thing, I was 10. And so footballing conscious wise, I wasn't in the same place as I obviously am 20 years later. So I personally have not ever enjoyed supporting Arsenal as much as I have in these last 3 years. And that's not something I really want to give up, or want to give up the person that's taken us there. And I genuinely believe that he is going to go and that he is going to go on and take this club to where I think it can go. Bilal says, mate, if Slot wins it over Arteta, it's an embarrassment. Again, Bilal is just in a different headspace. And that's fine. You're entitled to that opinion. I've explained, I think, very cohesively and comprehensively why I don't think that is the case, based upon what we have seen and what has happened with both managers this season. And if you can't take any of those points on board, or maybe you have but still disagree, that's absolutely fine. But I'm just not where you are, Bilal, and I just don't agree with that opinion, and I've explained my reasons as to why. TJR says, midfield injuries near in the 30s are different to a Van Persie run of being unavailable and then 1 year of setting the league on fire and going to United. Very true. Josh says, Arteta hasn't inherited the world-class squad that Slot has inherited. So many rival fans tend to ignore this and then claim Arteta has been challenging for 5 years when it's only been 2 years. And Arteta reached that level with Arsenal in a time far quicker than anyone ever thought that he would. That season in 22-23, when we competed for the league and it kind of fell away in the last 5 to 10 games, when William Saliba, of course, got injured. And I honestly believe if William Saliba hadn't have got injured, I think we probably would have gone on to win the league that season. But when that happened, we qualified for the Champions League in record time. And that was what we had looked at that season as being kind of what we were expecting. It was a case of, we have to qualify for the Champions League this season. And we did that at a canter. We did that with ease. And it was about something else entirely that season because of how good we were. And Arteta managed to take Arsenal to the point of being a title challenger in a far quicker time than anybody thought that we would. Anybody thought that we would. Even the most toxically positive fans out there honestly did not believe that they were going to be in that position. We did it with a canter, not Canton. We did it at a canter. Aaron says, can't rate Slot really, but I rate that. You absolutely can rate Slot, Aaron. This is not an Arne Slot bashing, and it should not be interpreted as that. Arne Slot proved at Feyenoord to be a very good coach. He personally, in his character and in his honours and in his environment, is not the manager that so many of Arteta's harshest critics would go for to be Arteta's replacement at all. But he is a manager that has proven to instill a philosophy, that has a clear style of play and has success with that style of play at a good level, that saw a Feyenoord side, of course, yes, get some fortunate scenarios with Ajax falling off, sure, but PSV was still a very competitive and still remain a very competitive team at that point, a team that was more than capable of getting a result against Arsenal at home as well, during that period where Arsenal were very dominant also, and it's still a very good achievement. And we did at RZ was also a very good job as well. So this isn't about bashing Slot. It's not. It's about understanding the context of the environment to which he has taken over that role and to what has happened to the teams also around Liverpool. And they've taken advantage of that very, very well. And it's a credit to them that they have. It's now about delivering If Liverpool don't win the league from this point, I think it should be seen as a massive failure, personally, because to be in the position where Man City are probably the worst version of themselves that we've seen in the last 5 years, that Arsenal have suffered, the injuries that they have suffered to that degree. Like when Arsenal lost the league last season to Man City, Arsenal would have beaten a Man City team that still accomplished 90 plus points. And I don't see either of Arsenal or Man City doing that this season, personally. I don't see that happening. And when they lost the league, of course, to Man City in 22-23, we did so, as I've pointed out already on this show, we did so because of, again, some frustrating issues that we suffered towards the end of that campaign. And controversy as well. If you remember the Brentford goal that should not have stood, that was then stood. Arsenal were leading that game 1-0. That was the game before we played Man City. Arsenal were winning against Brentford 1-0. And then they get given an equaliser, which should never have stood. Another crazy refereeing catastrophe. So, yeah. And then we lose Saliba and we have to go to Man City and play Rob Holding. So, it's all of those things. The idea that Liverpool from this point here, when you see them, you can't look at it as it's theirs to win. Like, it's without question Liverpool's to win. If they don't, that's the irony for Slot, is that Slot has now put his team in a position where if they don't win, there will be, I don't necessarily think there'll be big questions about Slot, but there will certainly be a question mark about why they didn't win the league, or what was the reason why they didn't, and how did that not? It may be that they then suffer their own injury crisis that Arsenal and Man City have also, suffered this season. So yeah, let's wait and see. Charnison, Slot's been great. He's beaten whatever's been in front of him, and you can't fault that. Exactly, that's what I'm saying. You can't fault Slot and what he's done so far at Liverpool this season. He has done a very, very good job, and if they win the league, I will say it time and time again, they should be praised for the achievement of going and winning the league this season. But when you're looking at it through an Arsenal lens, it's a very different lens, and there are very big reasons as to why. Lumen says, "Don't worry, Tom. Slot won't bottle it like your manager." Lumen, one of our resident internet trolls in the chat. Culture Mark says, "Tom, after Haaland's be humble disrespect, Man City have slumped. Do you believe in karma and the footballing gods?" I do now. So maybe we should take that forward. David says, "Isn't it funny that the folks calling for a sacking are the same folks who have given up on the season already? I think we'll be in the hunt at the end, and that is fantastic." I hope that we will too, and I hope that we can build this run. And I've mentioned this before, and I'll say this again now. And I'm conscious of the fact that we have a game today, of course. But if Arsenal drop fewer than 6 points between now and the game against Brentford on New Year's Day, Arsenal will have dropped fewer points this season than they would have compared to last season, despite having gone to the Etihad, at which point they hadn't last season, despite having gone to Spurs, at which point they hadn't last season, at which point having won at Aston Villa, which they hadn't done last season, at which point playing far, far tougher games to the same point. So for those that are really down about Arsenal at the moment, I understand as to why, but trust me, there are really, really exciting things potentially on the horizon for Arsenal if, and it's a big if, they can, of course, go on a run that we know that they are capable of doing. So let's keep that positivity. And as I've said before, to many times before, if you think the season's done, if you think the season's over, take that energy with you and run with it. And when I say run with it, I mean run away, because we don't need it. We don't need anyone saying the season's done. We don't need people poisoning our feed saying it's over. If that's your energy as an Arsenal fan in November, despite the fact that Arsenal have had a very challenging start to the campaign and had a massive injury crisis and still could finish this year in a very good position and are in a quarter-final of a League Cup and are sitting in the top 8 of the Champions League phase, if you still think the season's done, then be done with it and stop telling us about it, because we don't care. We move on and we'll support the team and back the team as much as we can, because that's what fans do. We can be critical, we can scrutinise, we can have our views, of course. If you're done, then be done. Actions speak louder than words. Stop saying it and do it and be done with it. Go away. We don't need it. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. Please, please, please have a fantastic weekend. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful, of course. Really do appreciate your listenership. Do drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show. I'll be back with you tomorrow morning, bright and early, 8 a.m., rounding up all of today's game against West Ham, of which I'm going to be at this afternoon, looking from the many, many miles away from the pitch that you have to sit inside the London Stadium. It's a nice ground. It's just not the best to watch football in. But thank you so much for your listenership. Do drop a like before you go. Subscribe if you're new. If you're listening on audio platforms, leave a very kind review. And as always, up the Arsenal.